because he's a £70 million goalkeeper. You have to look at him for the base facts of his goalkeeping, and he's not making the difference at the moment. And every action he takes, every decision he takes, he's thinking over it. He's not in a game flow, and he needs to get to that point. And the only way to get to that point is through hard work, minimising these errors.
To the shooter die, and I had two of them. The goal scored by Trossard looked very savable. But from your point of view, why was it not a routine save?
Well, I mean, it's simply because if you look at the trajectory of the shot, it's not a trajectory that's where you can predict where it's going. You know, if you stop the ball halfway between Trossard and Kepa, it's at head height. And from there on, the dip is vicious. And at that point, Kepa's he's made his decision to push off. And from that point, he's maybe thinking it's going to be shoulder, mid-height level. And that's what he's going for. And so he's got to adjust in mid-height. Now, it's not an easy thing to do.
Let's take this guy down.
One thing that you don't see about him is that his physicality or his physical attributes, don't help him, because he's not that 6'4", 6'5" goalkeeper where, his arm span's going to get him out of trouble. And I think that's, like I said, from my point of view, I don't think it's far from there.
Let's take this other guy out.
One last thing, and then I'll go to training. If you were Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who would you pick between Henderson and De Gea this weekend, and why?
I'd still go with David De Gea. It's his shirt to lose. We talk about the mental challenge that Kepa's facing now. It's a different one for David De Gea. Something he hasn't faced since he first came in, really. He came in with Ahmed Lindegaard at the same time, and they were chopping and changing for a couple of times in that first season. And I think that he overcame that. Now he's got to look at this in the same way, the same challenge, and he's got to rise to it.
Brilliant stuff, David. All right, well, listen, I hope you rise to all your challenges there with Oscarson, and look forward to catching up with you soon.
See you.
David Priest, always nice to hear from him, don't you?
I'm going to slightly disagree with him on Kepa, and Tom beforehand, actually, because although, it is, every shot is different and all that, you can look at metrics like expected goals and see the fact that basically Kepa last season underperformed by about 10 goals. So the average keeper facing the shots, Kepa would have saved about 10 more goals than Kepa did. So I mean, that is definitely an underperformance. And similarly, David De Gea in 17-18 saved an additional 14 goals. Everyone remembers that season when he was basically, almost mystical in the way he could stop shots. And I think a lot of the so-called slump of De Gea since then isn't really a slump. It's just him returning to average. It wasn't that bad the last couple of seasons. And that's why I agree with David that I think he will keep the shirt at Manchester United. And the other thing is, Dean Henderson at Sheffield United was, a good keeper, but he played a very different sort of football. He didn't take a goal kick within his own penalty area all season last year, whereas De Gea was the most in the Premier League at that. So, that's a massive part of goalkeeping now. And to put Henderson in would be a massive stylistic shift for United.
Interesting. United, who return to action in the Premier League this weekend, Saturday at 5:30. They're going to be hosting Crystal Palace. City are back as well, of course, as are Burnley and Aston Villa. City are at Wolves on Monday. Burnley and Villa will get on to their games a little bit later on. But Man United against Crystal Palace. Who has high hopes for this one? And what kind of hopes are they?
Well, it should be an interesting game because Palace went there last year and beat them, didn't they, on the counter-attack. Hardly any of the ball, but sucker punched them. And they look to do that again. Hardly any of the ball against Southampton, did they? Last weekend and managed to win. I thought Zaha looked really sharp actually in that game, so he'll go there in good mood. It's hard to tell, isn't it, where Manchester United are. There's no real pre-season form to gauge them on. Greenwood, will he feature? We know he's sat on the naughty step for much of this week. Will he be given a nod, and will he be fueled to go and deliver? And Donny van de Beek as well is interested. I mean, I can't see how him, Pogba and Fernandes are all going to fit into this team if they stick with the front three. So yeah, I think the team sheet interested in the game itself, which I think Manchester United might win at a canter actually.
I mean, we can probably expect a penalty, I would say. Crystal Palace are statistically the team most likely to get a penalty in Premier League history, and Manchester United are the current penalty winning machines. 14% of United's penalties in Premier League history have come under Solskjaer. He's got 21 in 59 games. Compare that to Mourinho with 12 in 93 and Van Gaal with 8 in 76, which is possibly a hint as to how these managers approach games a little bit. But even so, yeah, there's going to be a spot kick.
That sounds fair shout, Duncan. 22 meetings these two teams have had, and the only time Man United have ever lost against Palace was that game last season. Wilfried Zaha, of course, getting the goal for the Eagles last weekend against Southampton, who I have possession in 70%, 75% or so. Of course, Wilfried Zaha with a rich history of playing well at Old Trafford, Tom. That's where his career went off the rails a bit.
Yeah, and it happened so long ago that you almost forget. You know, I don't feel like it's sort of like a stain on his career in the way it might have been for other young players who went somewhere for big bucks and then flopped. He was sort of Alex Ferguson's last folly, wasn't he, really, in that he was the kind of tricksy winger who Ferguson would always make room for in his squad, and who ultimately things didn't work out for, coming off the back of a slightly difficult season in that, you know, he didn't score the goals he'd scored in the previous season for Palace. And I think, as we saw in that Southampton game, they do need Zaha to be scoring goals, because they don't have much of a goal supply if he isn't finding the back of the net. And yeah, it was a real sort of smash and grab that Southampton win. But yeah, you know, good for him to get off the mark. And I think if Palace are going to stay clear of trouble again this season, they'll need him to be finding the net on a regular basis.
Yeah, I think it feels like if Pointless ever did name a player to play for 3 different Premier League teams, Wilfried Zaha would be a good answer, because people forget the United spell, and they also forget he played 12 games for Cardiff in the Premier League as well. So there you go.
I'd completely forgotten that, I have to say. Confession time. Where's he going to end up, by the way, Zaha? Because it feels like
Crystal Palace.
He's going to play out of his skin to get. But Palace, they've signed Eze. They're reportedly in for Bright Samuel, who's that sort of player as well. Saeed Benrahma as well. Either Palace are going to be the most exciting team to watch in the Premier League all of a sudden, or they're just lining up people to fill in for Wilf Zaha. I still can't see that sort of logical destination for Wilf. It's a strange one, really.
Can you imagine there were 3 of Zaha, Eze and Benrahma?
Yeah.
It would be sensational. all supplying passes for Christian Benteke to blaze into Rose.
It could happen this weekend at Old Trafford. Midweek, by the way, Palace were involved in a pretty exciting 24-kick penalty shootout in the League Cup against Bournemouth. Palace, who were wearing an absolutely lovely kit. I don't know if you saw, it was white with 3 vertical stripes, red, white and blue. Actually 2. But anyway, it looked gorgeous. Anyway, all 10 outfield players scored in the shootout, which meant that then both goalkeepers stepped up to take one, Begovic and Hennessy. They'd asked who was ready to take a penalty. Hennessy's hand went straight up. Hennessy saved from Begovic, giving himself the chance to then win it, but oh my word, he skied it. David Brooks then scored, nickling Luka Milivojevic, all people who missed the penalty specialist, and the Cherries go through to face Man City.
I found myself watching that, wondering whether we're getting closer to a point where penalty shootouts all end up looking like that, because inevitably players are getting better at taking penalties now that every single player on the pitch is comfortable with the ball at their feet and fancies themselves as a bit of a footballer. I can see these sorts of penalty shootouts becoming more and more of a thing. Like even in recent seasons, Champions League or big international tournaments, they're very rare that you get a shootout where not a single player on one team finds the net. I suppose my fear is that players are getting too good at penalties, and so we're kind of ruining penalty shootouts forever.
This one wasn't ruined though, Tom. It was really exciting.
No, it was really exciting because it felt like a bit of an outlier, because it's still quite unusual to have so many penalties. But if that becomes the norm, what if penalty shootouts start lasting longer than the match itself? This is the future that I fear we may be heading towards.
Smaller keepers.
A penalty shootout theoretically could last forever. You could get players, it could be like 5 days into penalty shootout, and players are, they're crying, they've lost all the fluid in their body, they're crawling up to their penalties, but it could happen. Maybe it will.
Midweek in the Cup, well, there are 3 games still to be played, but the big headlines were the Bournemouth Crystal Palace game and Leeds and Saints getting knocked out. Saints, who named a pretty much unchanged lineup against Brentford, they got defeated. Leeds, who made 11 changes and were knocked out by League One Hull. Interestingly, in the draw for the 3rd round, which is next week apparently, League Two Leyton Orient, who came from behind to beat Plymouth Argyle, will be taking on Harry Kane's Tottenham Hotspur. They're obviously Gareth Bale's Tottenham Hotspur now, but Harry Kane's Tottenham in this case, because he actually back in May sponsored Leyton Orient's jerseys with a message of support for key workers. That's a fascinating detail, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. Are you suggesting that he'll be in some way compromised in this game? Like that?
I suppose so. If he scores, will he celebrate?
You'd hope not.
Yeah.
I predict that Harry Kane won't play in this game, by the way. I think given that, yeah, I mean, it's unlikely, isn't it?
By the way, the winner of this season's League Cup will not qualify for the Europa League, as they have in past editions. Instead, do you know where they're going to go?
The new one.
UEFA Europa Conference League.
The North Sea Trophy.
So maybe Harry Kane will be playing, eh? That's up the stakes a little bit more.
That had passed me by. That's a really underwhelming reward
Yeah.
for winning a trophy, because the UEFA Conference League is for all the minnows, isn't it?
Man City win it every year. as
Bye
well.
bye school day.
It's a bit of a moot point.
Right. Do you think that Palace are going to buck the